So I had to have this incision that went up, down, a vertical incision as opposed to a bikini line. So it went from my belly button down to the top of my pelvic bone. And I was quite against that because that causes other issues. It just means that those of us who are prone to something called keloid scarring, it just meant that it just exacerbated that condition, and that's another um, issue that I had to deal with post surgery. I ended up with some fairly big, a big keloid scar on my tummy, and the fact that we had to have this vertical scar as opposed to a horizontal scar did not help matters at all. Um, but that was the least of my worries, actually. And by the way, I'm trying to make these videos quite pithy and concise because I'll be writing a book and I'll go into a lot more detail about that episode of my life. And I guess I have now said it to the world, so the book will have to follow. So watch out for that. But yes, the other thing that I was having to contend with most women who suffer with any kind of gynecological condition and they have to have surgery for it, be it fibroids, be it endometriosis, you would normally have the gynecologist, maybe an obs and gynae specialist who would perform the surgery. In my case, I had to have two consultants. So I had a gynecologist and I also had a bowel surgeon. That was because it was quite a complex case, I was told. I actually had stage 4 endometriosis, which is quite severe. And it had spread all over my bowels, as I was saying before. And so we had to have a specialist who knew about bowels. And I remember her sitting me down, and still remember her name to this day. She sat me down and explained and said, right, bowels are notoriously difficult organs to deal with. And usually once you start tinkering with them, they don't like it. They rarely go back to normal. In other words, what your normal bowel pattern was prior to surgery will be completely different. So I happen to be a very regular person prior to surgery. And what she was trying to tell me was that post-surgery, I will then end up with either chronic diarrhea or chronic constipation. We just didn't know which was going to happen. And she was right. She was so right. And the other thing that she told me about, which was even more alarming, was that there was an outside chance that I was going to end up with a bag. Yes, you heard, a bag. An ileostomy bag. I'd heard of colostomy bags, but ileostomy bags are different. So where she was proposing to make the incision, where the endometriosis had spread, was on the smaller part of my bowel. And so where they'd be making, if I needed a bag, where they would be making the, creating the outlet, shall we say, for me to have a bag, would be the ileum, which is a small part of the bowel. The ileum is just a medical term that's used. And so she could see how distressed I was when she said that. And I remember her trying to allay my concerns and say, well, if it did happen, if it did turn out that I needed a bag, it may well be a temporary thing just to allow the bowel time to heal. Because don't forget that we're going to have to cut away a good chunk of my bowel where the endometriosis had spread and join it back together again. And sometimes there's a chance that where they join it, the sutures might, rupture or what have you. And so she was saying, best case scenario, that might happen. I might need a bag on a temporary basis just to allow it time to then heal and properly set. And once that's happened, they could then reverse the process and take the bag away. Worst case scenario, she said, she had to warn me, was that I could end up with a bag permanently. Now, even back then, I remember I've always been a woman of faith, and I just knew inside my head, as she was saying it, those words weren't quite resonating with me. I just knew that I wasn't going to end up with a bag for life. No, that wasn't going to happen. I just had this conviction inside me. I just knew that that was not my lot. I had a sense that things were going to get a bit interesting because I knew how sick I was and the extent of the illness. And there were going to be some challenges that I'd have to surmount, but I was going to end up with a bag. However, as it turns out, to make a long story short, so I went through the surgery. It was quite an intense process. And I remember when I came out, I did cause them quite a few head scratching moments because I remember my blood pressure was dropping quite a lot. And I think I was this far away from being taken into ICU, actually, because I remember having lots of tubes coming out of every orifice. You know, I had machines monitoring my heart, my blood pressure. I had the catheter. I must have had at least 6-7 different machines and tubes hooked up to me. It must have looked like spaghetti junction around my bed. It was crazy. And I remember just feeling quite poorly when I came round. And so, yes, I had the complication with the urine retention that I mentioned prior. So that was happening. I had gone into that period, into that mode of not being able to empty my bladder the normal way. So I had this indwelling catheter and a bag attached to my leg. And I think I stayed in hospital for about 2-3 weeks while they were trying to sort all of that out because they thought that the bladder would correct itself, but it didn't. Anyway, eventually I was sent home. And not long after I was discharged and got home, and I was just trying to get on with, recuperating and, trying to get back to normal life. One day, I then fell ill and realized that something seriously had gone wrong. And yeah, blue lights got involved and I was whisked away back to hospital. And it turned out that the bowels, remember that joint I talked about where they had to, they cut a bit and then they stitched it back together again? It had ruptured. I ended up very sick and I had to go into hospital. And what do you know? Simone Scott Sawyer needed a bag, an ileostomy bag. And so, yes, I brought some props with me today. The actress is out, so she can illustrate her points. And so here we have what part of a bag looks like. So I went rummaging around to be able to demonstrate to you guys so you know, or at least you have an idea what it looks like. So this is part of it, and attached to this flat plastic rubbery thing that you're seeing would have been the bag. So if you imagine a bag of sugar, maybe about this long and about this wide, that would have been attached to the bag. So this is adhesive. So this is the bit, as you can see, quite sticky, that would be stuck on to my tummy area. So imagine that's my bowel, okay, because I'm wearing a dress, so I can't really show you the actual cut. I would have showed you the sides. In fact, I showed you in one of my previous videos where the incision was made and the bowel was brought out of my abdomen to hang outside of my tummy so that I could then empty what my body didn't need as waste. So the bowel that was brought out, which is called the ileum, the medical term is the ileum, and it literally hung outside my tummy area by about this much. Can you see? So about 2, maybe 3 centimeters. And it was pink and it wiggled around. So when it was active, it would wiggle around a lot. That's when it was active. And there were times when it was fairly inactive and it would just sort of lie there quite limp and not do much. So when I ate, it got very active, very excited, because it was supposed to be breaking down all the food that was coming into my system and get rid of all the waste. So the bowels, our bodies are amazing. It's the most complex but most amazing piece of machinery. The bowels will effectively work out what is retained and what is pushed out as waste. And that's what the ileum part of my system would do, the smaller bowel, because the large bowel, where you have the colon, the rectum, and then eventually the anus, that part had been disabled because we needed time for the bowel to heal, remember? So that part wasn't working anymore. So whatever I would eat that would go down into my stomach and then through the small bowel would stop there. It would not make its way down the large bowel because that bit had been disabled. So I wasn't really functioning the normal way I should be functioning, apart from the fact that I wasn't opening my bowels in the normal, regular way like everyone else. The food wasn't going down through the entire length of my bowels. And you know the bowels are long, guys. You do realize that they're miles and miles of bowels inside of us that just coil around and around and around. Okay? So when you eat, as your food is making its way through the bowels, it's processing and extracting all the goodness, all the nutrients that you need. And then at the end, it's basically the chaff that comes out, that goes through your rectum and out through your anus. That wasn't happening for me. It wasn't going through that process of extracting nutrients and, retaining all the goodness that you need. It was stopping at the small bowel. So I wasn't really getting as much goodness and as many nutrients as I would get normally. So I lost a lot of weight during that period. Yeah, it was quite a period. So that would be the bowel hanging out, attached to the bag, which, as I said, was about, this long. So the bag at the bottom was an opening, but what they did was they coiled it up for a bit, and then you had like a strip to keep it in place. So I could walk around and carry on life in a semi-normal fashion. And whenever it got full, I'll just take away that strip and you could just empty the contents. And then once you've emptied it, you can then just wrap it up again and put the strip so it's in place and intact, ready for your next meal or whatever. And I'd see everything come through it, everything. I remember I was quite curious. The first time I realised I could drink, I remember sipping some wine, and I would actually watch the wine go through my system within literally minutes of me drinking wine. I would see it come out through the ileum into the bag, and it was actually the red colour because it never had a chance to work its way through, to the point where it would have extracted everything that needs to come out of the wine, all the grapes and whatever else the system does. It just came out in its raw form, is what I'm trying to say. So yes, this was my life for quite some time. I would walk around, like I said, imagine that's my abdomen, around where my belly button is. So the incision for the ileum was made around where the belly button is, just to the right of it. So maybe like an inch or 2 inches to the right, slightly lower down. And I'd walk around with this thing all day, every day. And at night, I would have to take it off and then clean all around the actual bowel itself. And I have my, what's this called? Wipes, sterile wipes to use. I had all these other dry wipes that were sent to me by the company. I mean, I had tons and tons of all this stuff. I had like a whole kit, paraphernalia, to get me through life. And that was my life for about a year. And I had to patiently wait for the bowel to heal. And once it healed, and I had to go for numerous tests and scans to make sure that everything was back to normal. And once the doctors were certain that the bowel had indeed healed and I was going to be able to use the bowels, I should say, in the normal sense, again, without there being any further problems, they were then able to reverse and take the bag away, and it was effectively reversed. So there you have it. And after that, I started to build my life up again, step by step, brick by brick, day by day. Ended up taking a whole year off work. Should have been just 3 months. Remember going back to work and having all sorts of issues and complications at work, but we'll go into that another time. But yes, I made it. I survived. My faith got me through. You can too. Okay.